Um, what if we centered friendship? So that's my question this evening. Friends like family. I'm sure many of you have heard this statement. Perhaps you've said it. What does this suggest to us? When we say friends like family, we're saying we have friends with whom we have a very deep connection. Friends for whom we feel deeply, friends who perhaps feel very deeply for us, and with whom we feel connected the way we do with our families. What else does this suggest to us? When we say friends like family, we're also centering the family. It's suggesting that we assume that our relationships with our families are deep, they are deeply connected, they are deeply emotional. What we're suggesting then is that we're creating a hierarchy between friendship and family where we center our families. Let me offer you another statement. We're just good friends. How often have we heard this? We've often heard this from the lips of celebrities who are disclaiming a romantic relationship. We've perhaps said this to somebody when we are disclaiming a friendship, usually with someone of the opposite sex. I want to invite you here to focus on the word just. What do we mean when we say just friends? Would we say we are just lovers? We would never say we are just lovers. The word just again suggests to us the possibility, or it suggests to us the probability that we see romantic relationships in a hierarchy where friendship is below romantic relationships. Now, what does this hierarchy do to us? When we say that we are just something, right? We devalue that idea because we would never say that of a romantic relationship, because a romantic relationship is the thing. What else do we understand when we look at this hierarchy? When we look at friendship, we think about two things, or two things are possible. One, that it is possible for us to have many friends, right? We don't need to have the friend, or we don't have just a single friend. The possibility and the probability is that you will have some friends, perhaps you will have many friends. The second corollary to this is that our friends do not have the same claim on us that our families do, or that our romantic partners do. So perhaps your friends are not entitled to feel possessive, to feel a claim on you, even though we often do, right? We feel jealous, we feel possessive about our friends, but the world tells you that you're not supposed, it's not appropriate to feel this way because we're supposed to have many friends. On the one hand, this idea that friendship offers us, the possibility of having many significant others, right? Friendship creates this possibility, is really a liberating and radical possibility. I will return to this idea of what it might mean to have the possibility of having many others, even as we recognize that all of them have some kind of claim to us, that all of them perhaps have the right to feel possessive about us in a variety of ways. Right? Romantic relationships, on the other hand, are premised on the idea of the one. And until quite recently, in fact, until 2018, romantic relationships that culminated in a marriage had a legal sanction where Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code criminalized adultery by imposing culpability on the male lover of a married woman, right? As this was struck down as recently as 2018 as being unconstitutional, right? So, in other words, what it meant was that a husband could sue the lover of his wife, right? This also implies the idea that women are property, but we won't go there right now because we're staying with what certain kinds of relationships mean or don't mean. What if we look at the idea of the family, right? What do we mean when we look at a family? Our vision of the family is based on the idea of a heteronormative family, which encompasses usually a father, a mother, and a child, or more than one child. we've had many challenges to this idea of family, and we owe a huge debt to the queer community that has asked very important questions of this vision of the family. They've talked about the idea of chosen families. They've talked about the idea of expanding a vision of what families might mean. This vision of the family, this what we call the heteronormative vision of the family, is also based on the idea of endogamy. What does endogamy mean? It basically means that you marry within a certain group. It might be your caste group, your religious group, your tribal group, your clan group. And the choice of romantic partner is often very stringently regulated, right? I'm sure many of you have encountered in the news or elsewhere news about people being attacked, violated, even lynched for choosing to have a romantic partner of the wrong caste, the wrong religious group, right? Now, one thing about friendships is that it's very unlikely that friendships somehow seem to transcend this barrier, partly because they are not seen as permanent, partly because they are not seen as relevant. You could have friends across caste lines, across religious lines, and nobody is going to come there to lynch you. However, there is one line that's sometimes complicated, and this is the line of can women and men be friends, right? And here, of course, I'm using the gender binary, even as we understand in many ways, we understand theoretically, conceptually, that gender exists along a spectrum, but nonetheless, because of the ways in which mainstream society is structured, we ask the question, can men and women be friends? And as a young college-going student, often when the phone rang at dinner time, it would be my friend Jagat from college. And whatever time we ate dinner, somehow Jagat would manage to call at that time. And I would spend hours lying on the floor, and I will also sort of date myself when I say that I would sort of wrap the wire of the landline phone around my hand as I lay on the floor talking to my friend for hours, right? And people always assume that we were romantically involved with each other, but we were not. We would often be discussing our own other romantic relationships, but it was and continues to be one of the most important relationships in my life. Now, often the suggestion is that men and women cannot be together or can't be connected with each other without there being something romantic. Now, all relationships, whether they're friendships, they're romances, are deeply complex and they involve a whole range of emotions, right? And so we need to complexly understand what these relationships might mean. At the same time, we should also recognize that friendships are political, that even as we can make friendships across class groups, across caste groups, you will find that by and large, people tend to make friends within their class groups. And this perhaps reflects many of your own experiences as well. When we look at cinema, and we look at how friendship is depicted in cinema, I also invite you to think about the films that you've seen. And if we look at Hindi cinema, for example, think of how many films you've seen that reflect male friendships and how many that reflect female friendships, right? You have male road films, you have films where men declare their allegiance to each other above all else. We don't often see similar images of women. And I hope that as we go on, that this will change, that we'll start seeing more and more images of friendships of women, because as we know from our own lives and our own experiences, women do have very deep friendships with each other. I ask again, what if we centered friendship? What would change if we imagined friendship as integral to our lives? As many of us know from our own experiences, that our friendships are central, they are core to who we are. They remind us, your friends often remind you in times of crisis, in times of self-doubt. They remind you of who you are. What if this understanding or this recognition of friendship were to translate into institutional structures? And when I say translate into institutional structures, I don't mean legislation, I don't mean inviting the state into our friendships. I'm just saying, what if you could list your friend on your medical insurance? What if you could get medical insurance with a friend? What if you could easily get home loans with a friend? What if you could list your friend as your next of kin for medical purposes, right? We already hear stories, and perhaps you've read news articles of friends choosing to live with each other, of friends choosing lives that involve each other, of cohabiting in a variety of ways. Can we imagine this kind of an opening up? An opening up that then opens up relationships, to think about relationships in much more open-ended ways, not necessarily as boxed into institutions of marriage or boxed into institutions of heteronormative families, but as a relationship that we choose, as a relationship that's constantly evolving. Friendship, like any other relationship, always involves labor, right? We work at friendships, we work at relationships. It also involves consent. The suggestion is that within friendship, there is a possibility of moving in and out by consent, by your choice, that we are in friendships out of choice. They are not relationships made for us. They're relationships we make. We recognize friends. We make friends. We meet someone we want to be friends with. We pursue friendship, right? We do it out of our consent. Other relationships. So one of the reasons why, and I return to the idea that I began with, that friendships often are undervalued because they are seen as transient, as impermanent. So many of you perhaps have, as children or as young adults, have had the experience of your families telling you, please don't waste so much time with your friends, or how much time will you spend with your friends? The assumption is that your friends are a transient part of your life, that it is family that is permanent. Now, this is not always the case, right? There is a structural assumption that your family is permanent, but we know many, many situations where family is estranged, siblings are estranged, parents are estranged from children, right? And we also know of contexts in which friendships are lifelong. So it's not always that friendships are necessarily transient. I want to also flag in the middle of the pandemic, my colleague Netila Kanagasbai and I were in the middle of a conversation, and we were talking about friendships and what they meant to us in that moment. And we said, we should write about this. Then we said, no, we should also invite others to write about it. And so the idea of an anthology looking at friendship was born. And quite recently, we have an anthology that was edited. It's called Yari, and it's based on the experiences of women and queer folks in South Asia. And as we put out a call for abstracts or essays and poems and artwork, we got hundreds of these abstracts. So many people wanting to write about friendship. One of the most difficult things was trying to pare this down into an anthology. People writing about grief, people also writing about being friends with artificial intelligence, people writing about a variety of things, people writing about friendships that had transcended borders, friendships between people of India and Pakistan, friendships that transcended age. So this kind of outpouring of conversation, of dialogue, and of deeply felt emotion around friendship. I ask again, what if we centered friendship? What if we valued friendship in the way that we value or we center or we recognize family or romantic relations? How would our relationship to each other and the world transform? How would we reimagine a world where we recognize a variety of relationships? How would other relationships transform if we recognize the value of chosen partners, chosen people, chosen friendships in our life?